Hello and welcome to panel 3 of day 5 of our 6th virtual streaming media event, Streaming Media Connect West. I'm Eric Schumacher-Rasmussen. I'm the VP and Editor-in-Chief of Streaming Media and also the conference chair for all of our events, both online and in person. And we hope to be in person again in Boston in May of 2022 for Streaming Media East. We will have one more virtual event in between this one and East, and that will be Streaming Media Connect February. We'll be putting out more information about both of those events relatively soon. If you're interested in speaking at those events, please watch out for the call for speakers, because we are always looking for people who are interested in sharing their talent and expertise and experience. So we'd like to see you on camera and not just see your names in the audience. Speaking of audience, a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions for our panel, please put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat. I'll be keeping my eye on the Q&A for questions, and I will relay them to the panelists. I can't guarantee I'll see them if they're in the chat, though. So please put them in the Q&A. Also, the live transcript is turned on. If you want to turn that off, you can go to the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Click on that and then select Disable Subtitles, and that will turn them off. Finally, just for being here, you are registered in a drawing to win an Amazon gift card for $50. But there's a catch. You need to stick around till the end and be present to win. We'll announce the winner of the gift card when we wrap things up. So let me thank our sponsors, Limelight Networks, Conviva, Signient, and Video Guys. And we have a brief video message from each of them now.
Videoguys.com is your source for the LiveView Solo, and our Black Friday special starts now.
Stream from anywhere, anytime with the LiveView Solo and Solo Connect bundle. Buy now with the 2 or 3 modem kit and get 1 month Solo Connect free. This includes unlimited data and LRT Cloud and is only available until November 30th, 2021.
Go to Videoguys.com or call us at 800-323-2325 to take advantage of LiveView's Black Friday special today.
In this era of streaming video, we are pioneers, helping make your stories more vibrant. Conviva lives in billions of apps on devices all over the world, measuring trillions of data points each day to provide real-time insights for your content, ads, and social. Conviva. Every stream, every screen, every second.
And I would also like to thank the sponsor for this session, Kaltura. So thanks to all of our sponsors, and I'd like to jump right in. We're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of hybrid events. And one of the things that I've discovered over the course of the last week is if you want to create confusion and debate, just put the word hybrid in your panel title. We've had a panel on the hybrid office. We had an earlier panel on hybrid production and for hybrid events. So I'm looking forward to some discussion, some debate. I know that our panelists are all quite opinionated, and rightly so. So I'd like to ask them all to come on screen now, and I'll ask them to each introduce themselves. And so let's begin with Charlotte Copeman from Kaltura. Charlotte, talk a little bit about yourself, what you do with Kaltura, and what you do in the event space.
Hi, folks. So super excited to be here and looking forward to a very animated conversation. So my name's Charlie, and I'm Director of Virtual Events at Kaltura. My role really is to work with both our customers and prospects and help them kind of navigate the crazy world that we are in right now, whether that be in person, hybrid or digital. So I act kind of on a consultancy basis, working with them on best practices, both from an ideas perspective and creating super exciting events, and also on a technical perspective too. So really looking forward to the conversation today.
Terrific. Next up, Blue Melnick. Blue, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. Really happy to be here. As you said, my name's Blue Melnick. I'm the creative producer at Sage. We are formerly an in-person event company that during the pandemic pivoted to a virtual-only event company, and intend on continuing to stay that way as we move forward, actually. We were the company behind some pretty big virtual events, mostly held in Zoom. Folks like Tony Robbins, Eric Worre. We live mostly in the personal development and business development space. We've produced about 75 virtual events with about 450,000 attendees, all through the power of Zoom. So excited to talk about hybrid, because we're having a good deal of conversation around that right now.
As are we here at Streaming Media. Our parent company, Information Today, is a media company that about 2/3 of what we do is plan in-person events. And so that's the conversation we're having here as well. Next up, Dan Sweeney from LinkedIn. Dan, welcome again. You spoke on an earlier panel about the hybrid office and touched on some of the topics we'll be talking about here, but tell our attendees a little bit about what you do at LinkedIn.
Sure. That was 3 hours ago, and I was still just waking up. I'm not like Alex up at 5 a.m. doing a show every week. So over at LinkedIn, we touch hybrid a couple different ways. We got LinkedIn Live and LinkedIn Live Events. So we're actually a platform that distributes live events, and then we have our production arm that's actually taking care of broadcast and production, both internal and external. So we touch a lot of the different elements of it. Sometimes we're the provider, sometimes we're the customer. So hope to be able to add something to the conversation this morning.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Alex Lindsay, who has devoted most of his life, but especially the last year and a half, to talking about how to produce event video and all kinds of video online with office hours. But Alex, tell our audience about who you are, what you do, and what you're all about.
Absolutely. I'm head of operations at 090 Media, and my specialty within the company is to focus on virtual events. So we produced a variety of virtual events last year. I've produced a little over 2,000 of them in the last decade. Primary clients are Google and Facebook and other folks that needed those. I kind of became part of the big push in Hangouts long ago. So we really got to be introduced to, we did over 1,000 of those between 2011 and 2014 or 15. And so, and then YouTube Live and Facebook Live and Facebook 360. And so I've kind of bounced around this for quite some time, and we were doing hybrid events, or what we would call hybrid events today, a decade ago. And so we got to learn a lot back then, and made a lot of decisions based on that experience.
And what about office hours? In case some of our audience members don't know about office hours, they should.
So when the whole thing started, when COVID started, I realized that I probably had a little bit more experience than most people in virtual events, because I just been doing it for a decade, and everyone else was trying to get started. So I was like, I'm just going to open up something to call office hours and answer everybody's questions. And what I didn't expect was a whole bunch of really smart people would show up and have conversations with me about it. And so we've been now meeting every day for almost 600 days straight. So every day, Sundays, Saturdays, we have long days. We now meet. There's 3 hours of office hours every morning, and then there's 21 hours of us hanging out in what we call after hours. And people are just geeking out and talking about how to do everything from, how to tweak a camera to how to use Zoom a little bit better. And so we've been meeting pretty regularly. There's about 5,000 people in the group, about 1,500 in Discord talking about it. And then any given day, probably 200 to 500 people show up to have a morning conversation about what we're talking about today.
It's really amazing. So if you haven't checked it out, and if you're here, I can guarantee you'd be interested in what they have to say. As I said in my introduction, hybrid is a loaded word. It's a potentially confusing word. So let's talk about what exactly do we mean by hybrid events? How do each of you define a hybrid event? Dan, can we start with you and your thoughts on that?
Sure, I'll take a shot at it. I think one of the things that hybrid isn't, and Alex touched on this, it's not new. The concept isn't new. It's something that's been around. It's now about degrees or sort of what levels you're bringing certain parts up and down. So, within hybrid, I see it as having hybrid audiences, meaning remote folks, and in on-prem, remote or on-prem talent, and then the production side of it. Same thing, production's been done remote for a long time. So there's sort of three main elements there. And again, it's right now, the tilt has been to go fully remote. Like if I think back to when this all started, really no choice in terms of having people in a room. So it was fully remote. So now we're tilting, at least we're starting to see at LinkedIn, a tilt back to, they're talking about on-prem, they're talking about either on-prem studios for production, or we're talking about actual in-person events. So the tilt is happening. What I'm noticing is the expectations, or the breadth is quite wide now, because now you can have something as simple or as a Zoom call, that's a webinar, all the way up to when we get back on site, there will be expectation to go back to full production. So you now have a much larger area. If this is the area you work in, you now need to know everything from simple fully remote to the most complex, and even the most complex fully remote to complex on site. And so that I think is the challenge. How do you keep all those tools sharp as the tilt starts happening to go back on site?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. We define a hybrid event as if I have one person in the room in the audience and one person online. It's a hybrid event. As soon as you can keep on expanding that, but it's a very binary thing for us. Is if you're going to put one person in the room, you're now going to have a hybrid event because they have to be taken care of as well as your online audience that needs to be taken care of. And so, that's how we define it. And then you can decide, as Dan said, there's lots of permutations of what that actually looks like.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Alex. I mean, we've done 15 years under our belt now of kind of providing live and on-demand video experiences, and it encompasses all areas of hybrid. But like you say, if there's one person in the room and one person in a digital environment, then that's your hybrid. But I think it kind of means a variety of things. So sometimes it can mean an in-person core event with a series of virtual pre and post activities, such as kind of training, accreditation, and build up mini sessions to kind of, build up the excitement around the event. But also it can mean running two events sort of side by side, one set in person and one set virtual. And I think there's so many different formats. It is important you have a flexible team that can lend itself to all of those experiences and quickly alternate if plans change. So I think, as Dan said, we're about to tilt again, and these tilts come and go. We've all seen huge events like NAB was supposed to go ahead and then is cancelled, kind of very last minute. So it's having that ability to switch between the two. So I think exactly as you say, if your expectation is one person live, one person, live in person, and one in a virtual environment, then that's hybrid already.
I think it's really interesting. As much as we try to define hybrid, I think our clientele are probably the ones actually defining it. And for a lot of people, especially those who have had success with virtual events and highly interactive virtual events, what they're thinking of is, I want to keep that. I want to keep that high level of engagement, be able to see my audience, interact back and forth with them virtually. And at the same time, I want to have an in-person audience experience. So that's what most of our clients are coming to us when they say hybrid. That's what they mean. And what winds up being the case, much like Charlie said, that's very much having two events at the same time. And it's a little bit challenging. What we see most people actually defining hybrid as is a little bit more how it was pre-pandemic, where you had an in-person experience that was very interactive, and then you had a live stream going out to a virtual audience that was more a fly on the wall experience. And I think that's what most people define hybrid as, despite the fact that I would disagree with that.
Well, my next question then is, do hybrid events actually work for the audience? I know that's a really broad question. I know it's very open-ended, but it's kind of foundational to, it kind of goes back to, just because you could doesn't mean you should necessarily, right? I don't think hybrid events are going away, but because there's all sorts of business and other motivations for them. But do they actually work? Alex, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Well, they largely work for the in-room audience. So they're you know, the real challenge, and we've had the opportunity to spend, you know, have all kinds of budgets from everything from 5,000 to 500,000 for a hybrid event, and over the last decade. And we've really got to all these permutations of how to build it and how to make it work. And what I will say is that it is extremely challenging to have a hybrid event work for the online audience. You know, and that can be, the live stream doesn't work. Putting cameras in the back does not work for the online audience. And what we measure when I say it doesn't work, we're measuring average view time. Average view time is all that matters when we look at these things. How long did someone stay when they got there? Marketing can fix the number of people that are there, but our job as event producers is to keep them in the room. And if you look at hybrid events, you're talking sometimes in small low minutes. You know, for your all day event, you might see, you know, an average view time of 10 minutes or 15 minutes because people just leave because they feel like they're outside of it. I mean, fundamentally, the real problem is that when you put one person in the room, you are fighting a million years of evolution. Is that the speaker is going to look at that person, they're going to play to that person, they're going to play to that audience, and they're going to put the online audience in the kiddie table. You know, that kiddie table that we used to sit at Thanksgiving? We're all there. You know, so that's where we all sit. Now, people are not going to complain. They're not going to send you emails, but they just don't feel like they're connected. And that is a devastating thing to do to your event. And it's a devastating thing to do to your audience because you don't see it. You don't see people being upset. It's like this thing, but then they just don't want to come back the next time, or they don't come back the next day. You know, and so what we see, for instance, in a lot of conferences is 2 or 3 days of hybrid events. You see a drop off in attendance that is generally, you know, between 60 and 80% because people just stop coming, you know, and they think they're going to watch the VOD later, but they won't. And part of that is the whole function, the whole structure of events, I think also didn't really work before. Like, you know, watching all those slide decks and with tons of text and everything else. I mean, we really just came for the coffee and cookies. And so the reality is that I, you know, that they haven't been that great before, and now it's just really clear. So I think that it's really, really challenging to have hybrid events work. I personally think that they're a transitionary, you know, format that we're going to use until we figure out how to really take advantage of digital events. I think that physical events will continue to exist. I think that, but I think that hybrid events are something that event teams and event companies are desperate to hang on to because they're trying to stay relevant. But I don't think that they have legs to last for very long because they don't pencil out most of the time. And if you actually look at that data, it becomes very challenging.
I think for me that's the data. I mean, I would touch upon that heavily because the data that you can get from the virtual element is incredible in comparison to the in-person. So the in-person, you know what they signed up for, or perhaps you've had some feedback and you can see how many bodies are in the room. But from the virtual experience, you know, as you said, what they attended, how long they actually stayed for, did they interact? So did they take part in the chat? Did they go into the breakout rooms and take part in the round tables? Did they take part in Q&A and polls? And that data is kind of a marketeer's dream because you just don't get that in the personal in-person event. But I think there's been a huge evolution over the last year in terms of hybrid events, and it's more lean forward now. So I think there's a very big difference between watching an event and attending an event. They're very different experiences. Watching is basically a webinar. It's watching a screen and kind of what folks are watching us do now. But attending has really rich, engaging experiences where you interact with the content and you interact with other people and you feel part of it. And we found, looking at the analytics, that those folks that put on these really engaging experiences, they keep their audiences and they keep them coming back. And add social, you know, yoga on the morning and cooking in the lunchtime. You know, you and I spoke about that earlier, and then social networking, fun stuff and games and prizes and win lunch on us and whatever it may be. So I think that's the evolution. And I think lots of the companies like ours, that's where we focus to keep it kind of super exciting and relevant. And like I said, the analytics that underpin this is incredible. And I think it's, if you lose that, you kind of lose all this amazing data that drives you forward.
Yeah, that does seem like the gap to fill, right? Even if I think about this event, Streaming Media West, I'd actually rather be on, you know, there. I know some people can't get there, but for the other side of it, the other piece of it, the social part, the conversations, the lunches, that piece of it. So you have to find a way to somehow fill that gap. I don't see it as things going fully digital, I think was the phrase. I mean, there'll definitely be elements of that, but what I'm seeing, or what we're seeing just anecdotally from folks going back in the office, people want to go back in the office. This is nothing to do with events or hybrid events, but people see value in being in a place. So I still feel like there'll be an element of that. And also they serve different needs. You can get the analytics online, you can have conversations online, but for me anyway, there's a missing element of being on site. That may only apply to certain kinds of events, like conferences like this, where it would apply, but it may not be relevant for something for all the other events that are out there. And it was interesting, Alex, you talked about sort of being able to see the audience, or and not being able to see it digitally. I think I'm right in thinking, Blue, I don't know if this is something you worked on. I have a sort of image in my head of Tony Robbins standing in front of some giant screen with a lot of people. Was that something that you guys worked on?
Yeah, it was. And it's, part of how we made a really quick transition. We treat virtual events like live in-person experiences. Alex and I have had long conversations about this, but our hosts interact back and forth. They can see, in some cases, thousands of attendees simultaneously and be able to actually interact with them to really create that stick factor. Because, to both of your points, for virtual events where it's not interactive, the stick rate is really low. And for somebody like Tony, he gets on stage at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning and goes until 2 o'clock in the morning. And you do see a dip, about the same as you do in person, incidentally. But people really stick with them because of the breakout factor, because of the ability for them to interact with the host, right? I mean, in a stadium, the chances of them actually having a conversation, that audience member having a conversation with Tony, if they're up in the nosebleed sections, is zero. But now virtually, everybody has a front row seat. Everybody has a possibility to have that conversation. And to take that experience and then combine it with an in-person audience is near impossible. And Alex said something really, really important, which is I think that, or I'm going to expand on it. I think that hybrid events are something that event producers are talking about as an attempt to stay relevant as we come out of the pandemic, because pivoting into the pandemic was pretty easy, right? We had one option. We had two options: go out of business or do virtual events. Coming out is a lot more difficult because now clients are coming to us saying, what should we do? Should we host a virtual event? Should we host an in-person event? Or should we do a hybrid event? And it's a difficult one, especially when they come to us with answers. And I think production companies are focused on hybrid. And when you talk to most production companies, what they really mean is live stream along with in-person.
Because that's what they know.
Yeah, 100%.
And even if it's something they don't know yet, within LinkedIn, we have a marketing events team, right? And so they were the ones who would actually put on the physical event. And so the shift there has been, they're hiring people to, they've got titles like virtual event manager and folks coming into those teams. And obviously we work closely with those teams, but now we have within our group, we have folks bringing in a different perspective, like that call it on-site perspective of events in. But yes, so they're trying to learn that. Some of us have been doing this for a while, but they're still trying to learn that. And so trying to find that balance, because you don't necessarily get to say, no, you don't get to do it the old way. You have to find a way to sort of transition.
And the funny thing is that there are so many things about the physical event. So I started in physical events 30 years ago, doing running seminars and so on and so forth, and building production teams. And what's interesting is we took all of our producers are physical event producers, and they come in and we do the events virtually, but we treat them like real events, like Blue was talking to. So we have green rooms and we have hair and makeup, and hair and makeup is us checking your webcam and your audio and everything else. But we have a place for the speaker ready room. We have the green rooms. We have the hair and makeup. We have all these other things, and these are all breakouts inside of Zoom for us that we just move you from one to one as a speaker and for the attendees. And so we still think like a physical event, but it's all happening in a virtual space.
Well, I think thinking like a physical event is the main reason why virtual events that are successful are working, right?
Yeah.
We add in, you're talking about that from a speaker's perspective, from an audience perspective, we add an in-person check-in. We have a one-on-one conversation or one to a few conversation with every single attendee who comes through a virtual event. It doesn't matter if it's an event for 1,000 people or an event for 100,000 people. And that sounds crazy, I'm guessing, but we did it in person. Why can't we do it virtually? And you can.
We've got exactly the same. We've got Kaltura's virtually live conference running all of next week, and we're doing exactly the same. So you can come and watch one of the sessions, but we also have breakout rooms that are manned, and at any time you can jump in and out of those breakout rooms, even throughout the session, and chat with real folks. And I think that makes, you know, such a huge difference to the experience. And I worked with an amazing company a couple of weeks ago, and they did exactly what you spoke about. They had a digital event, and they had a full TV studio setup, and they ran live TV throughout the whole entire event for the whole entire week. And yes, there were some bloopers and all sorts of other crazy things that happened, but it was a really amazing feel to it. They had a studio, exactly as you were saying, Alex, with kind of the lights and the makeup and everything else. And that really brought it to life. Kind of, it was, you know, unmissable, and you wanted to stay, you know, attached to it. So that was a really good experience.
And the final thing that I'll say, I know we're running off. If we answer every question like this, we'll never get to the end. But the one thing I'll say is that a lot of times when people think about these events, they used to have 90 people or 110 people doing these events, and they somehow think that when we go to virtual, we can go to 4. You know, like we can do this with 4 people. And if you don't have to spend the same money that you spend on physical events, but when you spend, you know, a reasonable amount of money and have a crew, you know, like our kit, you know, people think, oh, I'm just going to open Zoom and run it. The 090 system is $500,000 of hardware that manages all this, and we can color correct and manage everybody's audio separately. We have talkback into every single speaker. We have all those things, and that's what makes these events work cleanly. Is that it's not just off the shelf. You know, it's a dedicated piece of hardware that actually makes this work.
Yeah, way more technology involved in virtual than there ever was in person. And to answer the original question, you know, can hybrid events actually work from an audience perspective? I think the answer is yes, but you have to put so much more work and effort and thought into it. You have to be really deliberate about what you're doing and how you're doing it, specifically with the virtual audience. The in-person audience will take care of itself, but you really have to address how you're going to interact with and create that immersive experience for the virtual audience if you're going to do hybrid for it to work properly.
Well, and even in a virtual only environment, which we're in right now, and it is a very basic one, obviously, it's just me moderating and a producer running some slides and keeping an eye on things. Even that is much more complex virtually than it is in person. Blue, when you talked about, you know, audience members in what would be an arena, feeling like they can interact with Tony Robbins, which they could never do before. I think about us here, and we were kind of joking before we went live about how we're glad the audience cameras aren't turned on, right? It takes a special kind of talent as well as a special kind of technology to make that work. You know, and people talk about one of the reasons they like live, or I should say in-person events, is I might be able to connect with that speaker at a small event. Our events are small events, right? Several hundred to 1,000 people, maybe no more than 250 people in a room at a time. You might have time to go up to a speaker after he presents or is on a panel and exchange business cards. It never occurred to me that people might feel like they've exchanged something of value with Tony Robbins in this massive virtual event that would be impossible otherwise. So that's a really great perspective. Alex, as far as never getting to all the questions, we're already getting to all the questions.
Okay, good.
You know, everything is very intertwined here. And the questions, yeah, we're covering everything. But Charlotte, I wanted to ask you, if you were going to do a hybrid event, talk a little bit about formats. What's the best format to use? And if you want to talk technologies, if you want to talk, you know, the entire gamut of what format might need.
Yeah, sure thing. So I think I touched upon it earlier. There's so many different types of hybrid event, and I think we're all kind of in agreement, and each serves, you know, a different goal. So for some, it's the keynotes and looking at, you know, industry trends. For others, it's the networking. For others, they come for learning, and as we touched upon earlier, the social. But your events provider should have experience across the board, so they can provide you with both the tools and best practices to help you succeed. But I think the most important part is to have a provider with a team, and we've all kind of touched upon that. Most folks that we speak to say, where do we begin, right? We've got 3 folks here that normally run these, or a team of 4, marketers that don't have this experience. So if you have a provider that comes with a fully functioning team that's going to work for you, then that makes life easy. And also identifying the why are you putting on an event? So, don't just do it for the sake of it. Understand what it is that you hope to get out of that event. Because if you don't know why you're doing, the virtual or the digital element, how are you going to measure the success and the ROI? I think that, there's different types of models for brand awareness, for customer education, for digital expertise, for networking, and, you need an advisory team to work on this with you. So one type of event will absolutely suit one particular use case, but will definitely not suit another. So, a webinar, a cool, snappy webinar works really, really well for lots of use cases. But you don't want a 3-day event with a series of webinars, because, you're just sat back watching, and at some point you give up, like Alex said earlier, and move on. So I think the format depends on what it is, first of all, that you're looking from the other side of the event, and also things like the length of the event, the number of attendees. You can't have an interactive session with 1,000 attendees, because it would be complete madness. But if you're doing, smaller sessions and breakouts and training, and like the Tony Robinson thing, having folks in a room with somebody exciting that they really want to speak to, then you're looking at different technologies and different initiatives. So I don't think there's kind of one that fits all that I would say, this is the way that I would go. I think they're all completely different experiences. There's lots of different ways in which you can address this, but you need to understand what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to do it, and have a team that has experience in this to work with you on it.
I think that you need to be really careful of some of the technical things, because it is much more complicated. A hybrid event is a much more complicated technical event than either the digital or the physical, because you're now having to deal with audio and video going to both locations. And audio specifically becomes more of a challenge, especially if you're going to have a live interaction with the folks that are either online. And those can be the speakers, or they can be actually the attendees. So, we really lean heavily on our audio engineers to make sure that we don't get echo and reflection and so on and so forth back, because that's really one of the big challenges. The other thing is just staying conscious to the online audience. You have to, one of the things we've done for hybrid events when we're asked to do those is that we make sure that on stage, the speaker always asks every other question to the online. So, hey, we got a question in the room. Now we have a question online. Now that does 2 different things. One thing is that it keeps pulling the online audience in, but it also allows us to go down to 2 mics, and it makes our camera operators a lot more effective, because basically we're all lined up for the next question, because we've been given a breath between every single one of those. So, and there's no hunting that goes on inside of the room. One of the things that we started doing with a lot of these hybrid events is trying to bring people in a little closer. So this is a little bit of a physical, but also so we've kind of gone into the round. We were asked to do this by one of our clients, and I told them it was nuts. I was like, you should not do this. Do not put people in the round and put cameras all the way around the outside edges, because we're going to see cameras and there's going to be this thing. Once we did it, we were sold. So almost all of the physical events that we do, we pull the audience in. We create like a 12-foot diameter in the center, and then we pull the audience in all the way around the speaker if we can, sometimes 2/3, because our client is scared of all the way around. And so we pull them around, and then we've even started to bring them up into bleacher systems, and so that that means that you can have 200 people and no one's more than 30 feet away from the speakers, in the center. And so it really feels intimate. It also puts all those people as the background. That's your set, our people, and then we stack the screens on top of those, above them, so that the speakers can look directly at folks that are online. If you use odd number of speakers, if you're lucky enough to do that, you can shoot all the gaps and get these straight on shots for everyone in that environment. And it's from a hybrid experience, that's been that in the round has been one of the most effective that we've had.
That's amazing. That immersive experience, it is great. Fully agree with you. I think that's a fabulous way to address it.
Yeah, I think, Charlotte, and I'm sorry, I think you introduced yourself as Charlie. Did I hear that right?
I did. Yeah. I'm Charlie within friends and colleagues. My mum would completely disagree, so you can choose.
Well, no, let's go with Charlie. I love it. So I think Charlie said something really important. And again, I'm going to kind of repeat it, but that is when you're thinking about hybrid and what format to choose, it's dependent on the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Right? If it's a product announcement, you don't need interactivity. You don't need interactivity, and Apple has proven this time and time again over the course of the last 18 months. You don't need interactivity with an in-person audience in order to create a really cool product announcement experience. But if you're doing education and you do need to interact with your audience, then you, again, really need to put a lot of time and effort into it. We recently did a hybrid event and essentially ran 2 stages virtually simultaneously. All of the interaction with the audience when it came to do an exercise or turn to the person next to you and have that conversation. We've all been in rooms where the host or the speaker says something along those lines. All of that stuff was managed for the virtual audience on a separate stage, actually just backstage. And they got the virtual audience in this particular case, I think got, in some cases, a better experience than in person because we put so much of an emphasis on it. And, they had a different MC. That person introduced the room and introduced the event and essentially cut to the main stage for content. But anytime it went to either, in some cases, Q&A, but also that interactivity component, it came back to the backstage area. And then speakers, as they came off stage, we pulled them into the virtual area where they could interact with the virtual audience. So again, they actually in many ways had a better experience than the in-person audience. Now, the in-person audience could go down to the bar and have a cocktail with each other and get to know each other, but there's a lot of different things that you can do with virtual at that point. But there's a lot there, right? We really ran 2 events simultaneously, and talk about adding an extra layer of complexity. Now we're running 2 stages in the same ballroom. Audio became really, really important, as did, video, and making sure that the backstage video doesn't go to the front stage people. There's a lot to manage there. Way more staff, way more complexity, and so on. So
there is. It's definitely much more complex. But I think that also by doing that, the audience reach is amazing because not everybody can travel. I couldn't have done this had it been in person today. I've got a 5-year-old and I can't escape right now. But I wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have been able to join, and I probably wouldn't have also been able to watch because it's just too crazy. So I think geographically, you massively extend your reach. And I also had some interesting feedback when we were planning for Virtually Live. One of our speakers there, we were doing some prep, and they said that for their events, they end up with C-level because those are the folks that can get the budget and the permission to travel and attend. They ended up with, all sorts of folks at every different level joining a hybrid session because everybody could take part, and there was masses of value in those because they got to penetrate different organizations and work with a whole gamut of folks that they would never have been able to touch before. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we have to always remember is that if you want to have an exclusive thing, do a physical event, because that's already, I think we talked about this, it already excludes 99% of your regional market. So when you talk about global, a physical event is basically excluding 99.99999% of your addressable market for almost every company out there. There's a handful of companies that are local that might want to have something, but outside of that, you're leaving them out. In the hybrid event, if it's not serving them as the primary participant, you're basically burning up that relationship with what is your largest audience, and that's the thing. And it's why I think that digital events will slowly take over. TV did not replace theater. People still love going to theater, but the big game coming is going to be digital events that just simply are no longer constrained by time and space.
Yeah, I'd agree with that totally.
Dan, I wanted to ask you, given that hybrid events aren't going away anytime soon, you do have to ask yourself that question: how can I make sure that both the in-person and online audiences get the same information or content? It's impossible for them to get the exact same experience, but how do you at LinkedIn, and sort of philosophically, how do you think about making sure that the people watching online and the people in the room are getting the same core content out of the event?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the solutions is some of the things that Blue talked about in terms of sort of separate tracks or separate events, because I would argue that I don't always need people to get the same information and the same content. I might have different want different things to go to different people because they're different audiences. So if I'm constrained by making sure maybe there's a larger message that one wants to get across, that the customer or partner wants to get across, we make sure it gets there. But the people in the room may not see a slide deck, while people at home might see a slide deck because they're looking at it a different way. We had that challenge even before the pandemic. We would do the traditional, a traditional event, we'll call it, where there are cameras pointed at a stage. But then we would build a separate studio that spoke just to the online audience and gave them a different perspective and was more interactive and could take questions. But even then, our audiences at the time were on Facebook, YouTube. I think we were just starting to get into LinkedIn Live and Twitter. So Twitter, people would watch for 3 seconds, right? Facebook, 5 seconds. So how do you get your message across, or average, right? How do you get your message across in those short blips where they're scrolling through their feed? So we already had to think about how do you target different audiences? But I think the first step is recognizing you're not always going to get all the information to all the different groups, and you have to be okay with that. And then I think structure the different avenues, different venues with a different style. So either a different pace or a different length. Like people who are on site are probably going to be there all day. People who are joining online may only stick around for 30 minutes between their meetings. So just understanding what you can. So if you can give those virtual people other experiences, they can link out to other videos to watch later. They get follow-ups, sort of all the other pieces that could potentially get them that information.
One of the things that we've started to look at is really flipping this, and we've done this a couple of times now, where we flip it to what we call a digital first event. And that digital first event is we literally put a screen up or deliver to theaters, but you literally put a screen up so that all the participants are getting the same thing. So if you're in a ballroom, you're watching a screen that is the same video production that is being seen by the online audience, and there's just no speakers and that way the speakers stay totally tied into when they're talking to someone in the audience that's in that ballroom or in many ballrooms or in many theaters. They're looking straight at them. They see them in front of them. We route that to them so that they can see that person that's standing up, or they can have that interaction. It's the same experience that you had, except that everybody has the same one. And this also affects how basically overflow rooms worked, because in overflow rooms, I don't know if I've been to I worked in a lot of events that had overflows, 15,000 people in the main space. And then you've got, 5,000 here and 1,000 there, and they're all over the place, but you're really back in the kiddie table. I mean, they're not paying attention to you at all. And you're getting this kind of way far away experience because you weren't there on time, to get into the main room. And so the advantage of this is that all those overflow rooms, and those overflow rooms can be anywhere in the world, all have the same personal I'm talking to you experience from all the speakers. And so that's one way that you can provide all that content to everybody that's exactly the same. Now, the people that are in the ballroom, they get to have lunch and they get to hang out with each other and go out to drinks later tonight. So there's still advantages to coming to the ballroom. They get to talk to their salespeople and do all those other things. It's just that the content itself that's generated that they watch is generated for everyone exactly the same way.
Notice that we're focusing on like kind of events, maybe call them corporate events or shows. But if you look out, and I'm sure the audience here on Streaming Media West has a sports element and all those other pieces. I mean, that's been there forever, right? Where you get something different when you're standing next to the racetrack, or, so there's already a different set of there's a completely different experience. And I think recognizing that.
In hybrid, football, it's always brought up. American football is the best hybrid, is a great hybrid event. You've got 70,000 people watching, and then you've got millions of people. But yeah, that is, I think it's 4 broadcast trucks and 150 operators that make that a great hybrid event. We just want to keep that in perspective.
You don't have 4 trucks yet, Alex?
Yeah, exactly. It's 4 or 8. I can't remember. I think they might have doubled up. So anyway, it's a lot of trucks, and it's a lot of people. There's a big production. So if you're willing to you can make a hybrid. American football proves that you can have a hybrid event that works really, really well if you're willing to put the money and the effort and the crew into making it happen.
Right. I mean, the example I look at is like Formula One, which is starting to pick up here in the US. There's one production company that shoots that, or one group that shoots that, and it's distributed to multiple different channels, but the different channels, have different run-ups to the event, have different introductions. You're watching it online, you're watching it on TV, all the different, and then of course you have the in-person side of things. And yes, there's a lot. The other element, right, is when you talk about football or American football, NFL, they were already doing that hybrid production thing too. They'd be sending feeds back and cutting shows. Certainly in the college ranks and the Pac-12s and those places, they're already doing that, remote workflow. So there are some elements that we could look at and pull from for these more sort of corporate events that we might focus on.
I think the interesting thing about, sorry, Charlie.
No, go for it, Blue.
I think the interesting thing about the conversation around sports is the experience, for me anyway, with sporting events is actually the exact opposite of events. Because for sporting events, my experience anyway, while it can be more fun in a stadium with 70,000 people, the viewing experience is way better at home, right? So that's not necessarily the case with hybrid events that I think we're talking about today. And maybe we can take some cues, of course, from sporting events, but definitely a much different experience from that perspective.
It is. My husband's an audio engineer, and he worked as an audio engineer on the Formula One for kind of 6 or 7 years. So we've kind of lived and breathed that. And I, see some kind of, videos from, like he'll FaceTime me and it's in the background, and you can't be exactly the same. You can't be the roar of the engine and the energy that you get in there. It's the same for the corporate side of things. You can't be the energy in the room, but you also can't be some of the other immersive experiences that you get in a digital environment. There's something for everyone, right? I mean, there's pros to each of these different experiences. And I find that for those that attend in person, if you've got kind of pre-event and you've got post-event, whether that's learning and accreditation or whatever it may be, those for us are the events that sing. Our platform stays up, well beyond the events. If you go to kind of the AWS and the NVIDIA and all of those kind of events that we've put on this year, you see they're still up and running and have all this amazing content and learning that happens afterwards. And I think that is what I call an awesome hybrid event. Most folks may be there in person for keynotes because everyone comes for the keynotes and the great speakers and all that stuff. But the pre and post appeals to everyone. And you also create kind of stickiness and communities around that experience as well. Again, for marketeers, that's where the money lies.
I will say that one thing that we're noticing with digital events is that the keynotes is a good example of, I think Apple is basically wiping out the need for keynotes in the way that they're doing it. We've watched them over COVID turn a quick fix into, I can't watch other people's keynotes anymore because they've just turned it into a video production, and they still have little pieces of DNA of, hey, we're coming back to the stage every once in a while, but it's almost like a nod to the stage, and like we could still come back if we wanted to. But I have a feeling that when Apple goes back to physical events someday, you're going to see someone announce videos on the stage. Like, I don't think you're going to see anybody, because their productions have gotten so good. And then if you look at the digital production they're doing, even over the next couple of weeks with their tech talks for the developers, you're seeing the next generation of events, which is it's lasting a month. There is no overlap of sessions. There is, lots of interaction with the engineers. There's you can sign up for what you want. And so I think that we're seeing, I think Apple's probably further along. There's lots of things that they could improve on, but they're definitely further along than most of us related to how they're kind of approaching that. And what we are finding is sending all the keynotes and all the sessions to everyone ahead of time. Send it to them a week before, let them watch it. Here's the interesting thing is what people really want is Q&A, and which we haven't given them in this hour. But what we have found is that when you give them all the videos, if only 10 or 15% watch the videos, they'll drive the conversation during the and they'll get everything out of it that they would have gotten out of the session. So you don't need everyone to watch the videos to get the value out of the session, and it's much more interactive. View time literally goes up 10x when it's all that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, the beauty of SimuLive, right? Pre-recording means that you can have the speaker answer the Q&A live. You're speaking to the actual speaker in the chat and the Q&A. And I find that is, super engaging. And obviously, all the other cool stuff that comes with that. If we slip up right now, we're kind of doomed. There's no way out of it. It's live and we're, it's happening here and now. It's not pre-recorded, and we can do a second shot at this experience. And I think exactly like you said about extending the events, AWS, I think, planned for a couple of weeks. And then they changed their agenda and they said, you know what, this is great. Folks are attending and they're engaged. They ended up spreading it over 4 weeks. And actually it was over the holidays as well. And folks still came. And that was amazing to see. their attendance was huge. And then they kept all the content up afterwards, both, you know, on the Kaltura platform, but also on YouTube and in other places too. So yeah, that was super successful for them.
Yeah.
Alex, you mentioned Q&A, and I do want to spend the rest of our time here taking questions from the audience. And they're all over the map, but in the best possible kind of way. And so I'd like to start out with this one, and I'm glad someone brought this up because there's the question of ticketing and admission and registration. I will tell you that when it comes to planning even this basic virtual event, this is easy, right? It's everything around it. It's making sure people get their invites and their tickets and that the registration goes to where it needs to go. Do any of you have any thoughts on the best or good ticketing solutions for hybrid events?
Simple as possible. I have to say, when I went to register for this event, which I didn't end up doing because there were more than 2 categories I had to fill out, keeping it simple, right? So some of the advantages of LinkedIn is that a lot of the data is already there, so it does simplify registration. It's literally like a click often to say you want to see the event, then you'll get a reminder. So we have an advantage with a platform to be able to make it simple, but that would be my advice.
Yeah, minimum friction is the key to the operation. And I think that it depends on what you're doing. If it's all, there's an equation that I use all the time for pretty much everything, which is that action occurs when possibility is greater than circumstance. Always. It is like, and so if your circumstances are, it's a lot of filling out, you have to have something really good for people to want to do, or they're not going to do it. You're not going to achieve any action. So that's
I think the LinkedIn benefit is right. I mean, having the sign in with LinkedIn button is awesome, because all the information populates, and kind of having a connection with LinkedIn, I think is a real winner. And I think regarding ticketing for ours on our platform, we have a moderator chat for every single session that's running live, and enabling folks to speak directly with a moderator outside of the normal chat, so that, as folks are interacting, every now and again, there isn't a moderator question. It's a separate one-to-one stream, and that's been really effective for us. But that relies on white glove, whether you're doing that yourself or, we have a team that does that, and you have to consider what the value is in that, whether you want to invest in that, depending on obviously the size of the event as well.
I was going to say that Blue actually builds an interface for that that is pretty amazing. I'm going to make sure he talks about it because it's really cool.
Well, thank you. I'm going to actually let Eric get to the next question, because it feels like we're almost out of time. And
well, I will say, because Blue won't say it, there's a front end called Avio that he does that really makes interaction with Zoom and that whole process be a lot easier to manage. So he won't say it, but I will.
All right. All the remaining questions really are around interactivity and keeping all the audiences engaged. Specifically, though, Corey Sanders is wondering about virtual audiences on a video wall. Blue, you talked about bringing in the virtual audience into the room. How do you do that? Is there a plugin or software you can recommend for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's 2 sides to that. One is, how do you get the attendees into those Zoom rooms? Because in our case, we typically don't just run one Zoom room, but we're running, in some cases, hundreds simultaneously. And then the other side is, how do you do it from a production perspective? From a front-end perspective for the attendees, I will say that's part of what we built with Avio, and just leave it at that. From a back-end perspective, it really comes down to event production software and hardware, right? So, and they run the gamut. In our small studio, where I have a 20-foot by 10-foot LED as the backdrop, we're running Resolume Arena, and we bring in a couple of Zoom galleries, we split it up, and then replace each individual tile on that background. So it's not a plugin, but Resolume works really nicely with, for us anyway. But there are many options, many more options other than just that.
And what I will say is, one of the keys there is to make sure that you get eyeline. Eyeline is something that is super important to the online audience, and people skip it all the time. You want to be as close to the camera shots as absolutely possible. Those cameras have to be right over top of those screens, or we're even experimenting with cutting holes in screens and putting the cameras on the right in the middle of the screen. So when they're looking, this is rear projection screen, not LED, so that you can actually that you're looking right at them. We've really found that makes a massive difference in the engagement.
What about latency? We have a bunch of streaming folks here, and they're always asking about latency and how to address that. How much does it matter? to the audience watching online how much latency there is. Obviously, when it comes to interactivity, if it's actual audio and video interactivity, that's a big issue. Talk a little bit about latency, and I think that's probably going to take us to the end of the conversation. In fact, I know it is, so if you could keep your answers short, but any suggestions you could provide would be valuable.
I think there's two kinds. There's us talking. This is the one interactivity. And then the second one is the question latency. But oftentimes the question latency can be minutes or hours, when you're working in one of those events. So I think that you have to think about that. We don't worry about latency under a minute because we're not going to get to those questions that fast anyway.
Yeah, I think in our experience, we're seconds in terms of latency. So it's no different from a live experience. And again, depends on the provider that you use. But for us, it's seconds. So you really can interact live. And I think that's super important when you're, running these types of events.
Yeah, well, I'm with Charlie on that. We highly leverage Zoom, actually the Zoom meeting platform, not Zoom Webinar, for our in-person events. So interactivity back and forth with the audience latency is non-existent basically. So I think for us that works well. Now, once you introduce a stream, and if that's your version of hybrid, it's probably going to introduce a significant latency issue, and the interactivity then becomes less good.
Right.
Yeah, and we touched on that this morning sessions about the office side, because you can do, when you get back in the office and you start having to stream in order to use ECDNs and things, then the latency will come back. You can't have hundreds or thousands of people necessarily on Zoom Webinar in an office because you'll have all those unicast streams coming in.
All right, that does bring us to the close. I am going to save these questions from the audience and send them to our panelists. And if you all have the time to respond, that would be great. I will also, once again, recommend that people attend Alex's office hours, because these questions are exactly the kinds of questions that are getting asked and answered there. Thanks again to our panelists. This has been terrific. Thanks again to our sponsors, Conviva, Limelight Networks, Signiant, Video Guys, and for this panel, Kaltura. The Amazon gift card winner is Chris King. So Chris, watch your email next week, and that will be sent to you. That wraps things up. Join us again in 30 minutes when we'll be talking about what's next for sports and esports streaming. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you.
VideoGuys.com is your source for the Live View Solo, and our Black Friday special starts now.
Stream from anywhere, anytime with the Live View Solo and Solo Connect bundle. Buy now with the 2 or 3 modem kit and get 1 month Solo Connect free. This includes unlimited data and LRT Cloud and is only available until November 30th, 2021.
Go to VideoGuys.com or call us at 800-323-2325 to take advantage of Live View's Black Friday special today.
In this era of streaming video, we are pioneers, helping make your stories more vibrant. Conviva lives in billions of apps on devices all over the world, measuring trillions of data points each day to provide real-time insights for your content, ads, and social. Conviva. Every stream, every screen, every second.